They said, "You can't cook anymore, you'll ruin everything." I made my secret dish, and they ate it in 5 minutes. The table was already set when I arrived, takeout boxes stacked in the center, plastic containers filled with noodles and stir-fried vegetables. Julia, my daughter-in-law, was moving quickly between the kitchen and dining room, arranging paper plates. She didn't notice me at first. Carl, my son, greeted me with a distracted kiss on the cheek, already pulling chopsticks from their wrappers. Ruby, my granddaughter, scrolled on her phone while tapping her fork against the table in impatience. "Dinner's ready," Julia announced briskly. "Nothing fancy, but it's fast." I slipped into a chair, folding my napkin neatly in my lap. The smell of soy and sesame hung in the air, sharp but flat. I thought of how the house used to smell on nights like this: bread baking, onions slowly caramelizing, chicken roasting until the skin turned golden and crisp. Ruby looked up suddenly. "Grandma, do you still cook? Like, real food? Or do you just eat soup from cans now?" She laughed as though it were a joke. Carl chuckled. "Don't tease her." But Julia smirked, sliding a carton of fried rice onto the table. "Oh, she knows we're joking. Anyway, it's easier this way. We can't have her cooking anymore. She'd just burn something or forget the salt." The words hit like a slap, though her tone was light. "You used to cook all the time, didn't you?" she added. "But it's been years." "You probably lost the touch. That's what happens." I opened my mouth, then closed it. My fingers tightened around the napkin. Ruby giggled. "Yeah, Dad said once you ruined the stew. Remember?" He said it was so salty he had to drink 2 glasses of water. Laughter spilled around the table. Not cruel, but careless. The kind that stings worse than mockery. I lowered my eyes, forcing a smile that didn't reach my cheeks. I picked at the noodles, the sauce too thick, too sweet. Carl cleared his throat, maybe sensing my silence. "Well, times change. No need to fuss with cooking anymore. We've got delivery apps." Julia raised her glass. "Amen to that. Saves time, saves stress." They moved on to other topics: work, school, bills, but their words lingered in me like smoke. "You can't cook anymore. You'll just spoil it. You've lost your touch." I chewed slowly, swallowing against the lump in my throat. When the meal was over, Ruby tossed her plate into the trash. Julia swept the cartons back into the kitchen. Carl checked his messages. No one noticed that I barely ate. As I gathered my scarf to leave, I glanced at the table. Plastic, cartons, grease-stained napkins. No warmth, no memory. Just food meant to fill a stomach, and nothing more. On the ride home, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise, "I haven't lost it." Not yet. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. Once, this place had echoed with voices, the clatter of forks, the whistle of the kettle on the stove. Now it felt like a museum of someone else's life, every corner holding a memory that no one but me could still see. I hung my coat by the door, slipped off my shoes, and walked straight to the kitchen. The counter was bare except for the small basket where I kept envelopes and coupons I rarely used. I pulled out a chair and sat, staring at the surface as if it might answer the ache in me. "You can't cook anymore," Julia's voice replayed in my head. "You'll just burn something." I pressed my palms against the table. For a long moment I thought I might cry, but instead I stood, reached for the highest cupboard, and pulled down an old tin box I hadn't touched in years. The lid creaked as I lifted it. Inside was a stack of index cards and folded sheets, my recipe collection. Some cards were stained with butter spots and smudges of flour, my handwriting faded but still legible. Chicken casserole, apple crisp, lentil soup. Each name tugged at a thread in my chest. And then, near the bottom, I found it. Chicken pot pie. The words were written in my mother's hand, round and sure. I traced them with my finger, remembering her kitchen. I could almost smell it, the buttery crust, the steam rising as she cut into it, the creamy sauce that clung to carrots and peas, the tender chicken that melted on the tongue. Every Sunday when I was a girl, she made it. Rain or shine, she'd tie on her apron, hum some hymn, and spend the afternoon rolling dough by hand. We all gathered around the table, impatient, sniffing the air like hungry dogs. And when the pie came out of the oven, golden and bubbling, it wasn't just food. It was home itself. When I married, I carried that recipe with me. For years, I made it for Carl and Frank, my husband. Carl used to ask for second helpings, scraping the crust from the edges of the pan. Even Julia once, early in their marriage, had praised it, asking how I got the sauce so thick. But after Frank passed, I stopped. The pie belonged to a time when the house was full. Making it for myself felt too heavy, like setting a table for ghosts. So the recipe stayed in the tin, buried under years of silence. I held the card now, my hands trembling, not from age, but from something sharper. "They think I've forgotten," I whispered. "They think I've lost it." I pressed the card flat on the counter, smoothing its edges. A thought took root, firm and steady. I would make it again. Not for nostalgia, not even for revenge, but because it was still mine. And when they tasted it, if they dared, there would be no forgetting. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Old habit, though I rarely had reason anymore. The house was still dim, the only sound the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I set a kettle on the stove and sat with my tea, the recipe card beside me. The edges curled slightly, but the words were clear as ever. I made a list in the margin of an old envelope. Chicken, carrots, peas, potatoes, cream, butter, flour. And of course the spices. Thyme, a pinch of nutmeg, salt, pepper. Nothing exotic, nothing expensive. But together, they built a world. By 9, I was at the market. I hadn't been there in weeks, usually surviving on the small supply of canned goods in my pantry. The aisles felt unfamiliar, filled with bright packages I didn't recognize. People rushed past me with carts full of frozen meals and bottled drinks. No one lingered over the produce. No one touched and smelled, testing for ripeness the way my mother taught me. I paused at the butcher's counter. "A whole chicken, please," I asked. The young man blinked. "Whole? You mean not cut up?" "That's right," I said, with a smile that carried more weight than it needed to. At the checkout, I felt almost giddy. My bag was heavy with ingredients, but heavier still with memory. As I walked home, I thought of Frank's laugh, of Carl tugging on my apron strings when he was small. I thought of the way the pie used to bring silence to the table, not the cold silence of delivery cartons, but the reverent quiet of people too busy eating to talk. Back in the kitchen, I laid everything out carefully, almost ceremonially. The chicken on the counter, the vegetables washed and lined in a row. The flour jar heavy in my hands. I rolled up my sleeves. The dough came first. Butter cut into flour with a fork until it resembled crumbs, then water, just enough to bind. I kneaded it slowly, deliberately, feeling the resistance under my palms. My wrists ached, but I pressed on. Each push was a memory, each fold a quiet defiance. While the dough chilled, I simmered the chicken, filling the house with a fragrance I hadn't smelled in years. Steam rose, curling into the air like a signal. I chopped carrots, diced potatoes, shelled peas. The rhythm of the knife steadied me. As the sauce thickened in the pan, cream, broth, a whisper of nutmeg, I felt something loosen in my chest. This wasn't just cooking. It was reclaiming. By afternoon, the pie was assembled. The filling nestled beneath the crust, the edges crimped with care. I slid it into the oven and sat nearby, waiting. Minutes stretched, the air growing warm. Then came the smell. Golden, rich, impossible to ignore. It spread through the house, seeping into every corner, wrapping itself around me like an old beloved shawl. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. They said I couldn't cook anymore. They said I would ruin it. But here it was, proof rising in the oven. The timer hadn't even finished its soft ticking when the knock came. I frowned, wiping my flour-dusted hands on a towel. Few people visited me unannounced these days. I opened the door to find Kay, my neighbor from across the street. She held a grocery bag in one arm, her hair tucked under a wool hat. Her eyes widened the moment the scent drifted out. "Good heavens," she said, stepping closer. "What are you cooking?" "Smells like Sunday dinners when I was a girl." I smiled, a little shy, a little proud. "Chicken pot pie. Haven't made it in years." Her eyebrows lifted. "Well, it smells like heaven's kitchen." "May I?" She gestured toward the inside. I hesitated. My kitchen had become my private place, my refuge. But something in her voice felt honest, almost hungry. I nodded. "Of course." Inside, Kay set down her bag and gravitated to the stove, where the golden pie gleamed through the oven glass. She leaned forward, breathing it in. "No one cooks like this anymore," she murmured. "Not with patience. Not with love." Her words startled me. They were too close to what I'd been thinking. I busied myself setting 2 plates on the counter. When the timer rang, I pulled the pie out, its crust bubbling at the edges, steam rising like a promise. I cut a slice for her, the knife sliding cleanly through the layers. The filling spilled gently onto the plate, creamy sauce, tender chicken, vegetables glistening. Kay took one bite, then closed her eyes. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she pressed her palm against her chest. My word, I'd forgotten food could taste like this. Her voice cracked slightly, as if the taste carried her somewhere she hadn't visited in years. She swallowed hard, then laughed. "You've got to teach me how to make this." "My grandkids think dinner comes in cardboard boxes." I chuckled, but my throat felt tight. "Mine too," I said softly. Kay looked at me, really looked. "Don't let them tell you you've lost your touch. This is a gift." The words settled inside me, warm and steady. We ate together at the counter, the silence between us not empty but full, like the hush that follows a hymn. Each bite reminded me that I still had something to give, something worth sharing. When Kay finally left, carrying a slice wrapped carefully in foil, she paused at the door. "Make it again," she said firmly. "Don't keep it hidden." Some things are meant to be tasted. After she was gone, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the pie dish, half empty already. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I traced the rim of the pan with my finger, whispering the thought that had been growing in me since last night. Next time, I'll let them taste too. Sunday afternoon crept in gray and cold, the kind of day that begged for warmth. I had already decided. I would bring the pie to Carl's house that evening. Not an experiment this time, not just for me. A quiet test, a challenge without words. The thought made my palms sweat. I could still hear Julia's laugh, Ruby's careless teasing. "You can't cook anymore. You'll ruin it." But Kay's face lingered too. The way she'd closed her eyes after the first bite, as if tasting something she'd forgotten she needed. I pulled out the ingredients again, more deliberate this time. The chicken simmered slowly, the aroma filling the house. My hands moved with memory, not hesitation. The dough rolled beneath my palms, pliant and forgiving. Each step steadied me. By late afternoon, the pie was cooling on the counter, its crust bronzed, the smell too rich to ignore. I wrapped it carefully in a clean towel, slid it into my old pie carrier, the one I hadn't used in nearly a decade, and placed it gently on the passenger seat of my car. The drive to Carl's was short, but my chest tightened with every block. I remembered all the dinners where my food had once been the centerpiece. Birthdays, holidays, even sick days when a pot of soup meant comfort. And then the shift. Takeout cartons replacing roasting pans, my apron traded for silence. When I arrived, Ruby opened the door, earbuds dangling from her ears. She blinked at the sight of me carrying the dish. "What's that?" "Dinner," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. She shrugged. We already ordered Thai. Julia appeared behind her, eyes narrowing slightly. You didn't have to cook, you know. We've got plenty, I stepped inside without asking. The house smelled of curry and fried garlic, but the fragrance of my pie cut through, softer, deeper. I set it on the counter, unwrapping the towel. The crust gleamed, steam still curling from its vents. Carl came in then, stopping short when he saw it. Mom, he said carefully, you really didn't need to. I wanted to, I interrupted. My hands rested lightly on the dish. Just try it. That's all I ask. They exchanged glances, a flicker of discomfort, maybe even annoyance. Ruby rolled her eyes, muttering something about carbs. Julia reached for a carton instead, but the smell spread, impossible to ignore. The golden crust, the bubbling edges, like a memory pressing itself against their ribs. Finally, Carl sighed and picked up a knife. One piece, he said. For old time's sake. He cut into the pie. The sauce spilled thick and fragrant, coating the vegetables, glistening on the chicken. He slid a portion onto his plate, took a bite, hesitant, almost cautious. The room stilled. Carl blinked once, then again. He didn't speak, just lifted his fork for another bite, then a third. Julia frowned, curiosity creeping in despite herself. Ruby leaned forward, and for the first time in years, the table was quiet, reverent, waiting. Carl didn't stop at one bite. He finished half the slice before Julia, unable to stand the silence, leaned over with her fork. Let me try, she said quickly, though it sounded more like a demand than a request. I watched as she cut off a small piece, suspicious, her lips tightening as if bracing for disappointment. She placed it on her tongue. Her chewing slowed. For a moment, she didn't look at anyone, just down at her plate. Then Ruby piped up. Well, is it awful? Julia glanced at her, then back at the pie. Her voice was thin, but it betrayed her. It's fine. But I caught it. The flicker in her eyes, the way her fork drifted back toward the dish without thought. She took another bite. Ruby huffed, rolling her eyes again, but curiosity gnawed at her too. She stabbed a piece from Carl's plate and popped it into her mouth. Her expression shifted instantly. The sarcasm fell from her face. She chewed, swallowed, then looked at me. Wait. This is actually really good. Carl let out a short laugh, the kind that carried surprise. Better than I remembered, he admitted, cutting another slice. Within minutes, all three of them were leaning over the pie, forks clinking, steam rising as they helped themselves. No one reached for the takeout cartons. No one spoke, except for the occasional murmur of appreciation. I sat back, hands folded in my lap, watching the scene unfold. Their plates emptied and refilled, the pie shrinking with every pass of the knife. Julia finally broke the silence. How did you... She stopped, shook her head, then tried again. What did you put in it? Nothing you don't know, I said softly. Chicken, vegetables, broth, cream, flour and butter for the crust. But it doesn't taste like anything I've had in years. Her tone was almost defensive, as if searching for a reason outside herself. Ruby licked her fork. It's better than restaurant food. Way better. Carl leaned back in his chair, his plate scraped clean. I forgot what this was like, he said quietly. Food that makes you remember things. Dad used to... He stopped himself, but the silence finished the sentence for him. I kept my face calm, though my chest ached with the weight of memory. Frank's laughter, the clatter of his fork, the way he always claimed the corner piece with the thickest crust. The pie was gone in less than 10 minutes. Only crumbs and a faint golden smear remained on the dish. Ruby stared at the empty pan. There's no more? I shook my head. She laughed, embarrassed. Guess we should have slowed down. Carl looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing something he'd forgotten was still there. His voice was quiet, almost regretful. You haven't lost it, Mom. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The empty pan spoke for me. When I stood to gather my things, Julia was already stacking the takeout cartons, shoving them into the trash with more force than necessary. Her jaw was tight, her movements quick, as though the empty pie dish offended her. "I'll take this home," I said, slipping the pan into its carrier. My voice was light, but inside I felt something firmer, steadier than I had in years. Carl rose and put a hand on my shoulder. "Thanks, Mom. Really, that was something he didn't meet my eyes, but the hesitation in his voice was thick with memory." Ruby lingered near the table, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "Could you make it again sometime? Maybe show me?" The question was tentative, almost shy, and it startled me more than anything else that evening. Julia cut in before I could answer. "Ruby, don't bother your grandmother. She doesn't need to play chef every time we eat." Her words were coated with a sweetness that didn't disguise the steel underneath. Ruby flushed, dropping her gaze. Carl cleared his throat, looking at Julia with mild reproach, but he said nothing. He never did when her tone sharpened. I slipped my scarf around my shoulders and headed for the door. The air outside was cool and damp, a light mist settling over the street. Behind me, the house buzzed with quiet tension. Carl mumbling thanks again, Ruby whispering good night, Julia silent. The walk to my car was short, but each step felt longer than the last. I carried the empty pan like a trophy, though it weighed almost nothing. A strange mix of emotions knotted in me: pride, sorrow, and a spark of something sharper. Victory, perhaps, but not without cost. As I drove home, the smell of the pie still lingered in the carrier. My hands on the wheel trembled slightly, not from age, but from release. I'd proven something, proved it to them, but more importantly to myself. Yet Julia's face haunted me. The way she pressed her lips together, the faint shadow of resentment in her eyes. She had built her rhythm around takeout boxes and easy shortcuts, around the quiet dismissal of anything I once gave. And tonight, that rhythm had faltered. At home, I placed the empty dish in the sink, but didn't wash it right away. I left it there, golden streaks still clinging to its sides, as if proof should linger a little longer. I sat at the table with a cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a benediction. The house was silent, but not heavy anymore. I thought of Ruby's question, "Show me," and felt a warmth spread through me that the tea alone could not provide. For the first time in years, I didn't feel dismissed. I felt necessary. But I also knew something had shifted, and not just in me. Julia wouldn't let this pass quietly. And so, as I sipped the last of my tea, I whispered to the stillness around me, "Let her try." The following week, Julia called me unexpectedly. Her tone was light, too light, like someone rehearsing lines for an audience. "Carl and I thought maybe you'd like to come by on Sunday again," she said. "You know, just for company. No need to cook. We've got it covered." I almost laughed. Covered. As if last week's empty pie dish had been a fluke, an accident she intended to correct. "I'll come," I answered simply. On Sunday, I arrived to find the kitchen crowded with noise and smells, but not the kind I knew. Julia had lined the counter with plastic containers from the gourmet grocery store, pre-made lasagna, garlic bread wrapped in foil, salad in a clear tub. "See?" she said brightly, glancing at me over her shoulder. "No stress. Everything's foolproof." Dinner in under an hour, Carl hovered nearby, half distracted by his phone. Ruby sat at the table with her math homework spread out, though her eyes drifted toward me as I entered. Julia busied herself tearing open packages, arranging food in oven-safe trays. "It's just easier this way," she continued. "No mess, no mistakes." Her words were sharp, though she coded them in cheer. I watched quietly, hands folded before me. The air smelled of preservatives, salt, something metallic beneath the garlic. My stomach turned, not from hunger, but from the ache of comparison. Ruby wrinkled her nose. It doesn't smell like Grandma's food. Julia froze for a second, then forced a laugh. Well, not everyone can spend hours in the kitchen, sweetheart. Some of us have jobs, lives. Convenience matters. Carl glanced up then, his expression torn, but he said nothing. Dinner came quickly, as Julia promised. The lasagna sliced neatly, the bread steamed when unwrapped. But the flavors were flat, the textures limp. Carl ate politely. Ruby pushed food around her plate. Julia filled the silence with chatter about school schedules, work deadlines, the neighbor's barking dog. But beneath her words lay something else. Insistence. A push to reassert control, to remind everyone that she, not I, defined the meals in this house. I took small bites, swallowing carefully. The memory of last week's pie was still strong on my tongue, richer than anything on the table now. Ruby finally spoke. Grandma, will you make that pie again? The chicken one. The air stilled. Julia's fork clattered softly against her plate. Ruby, she said, her voice tight, don't be rude. We're eating dinner right now. Ruby blinked, startled. I wasn't being rude. I just liked it. Carl cleared his throat. She's right, it was good. Maybe sometime, Mom, you could... Julia cut him off with a smile too wide. Maybe. But tonight, we've got lasagna. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The tension in the room was answer enough. Later, as I washed my plate in silence, I caught Ruby's gaze. She mouthed a single word across the room, small but insistent. Please. And I knew then. The pie wasn't finished. Not yet. Ruby showed up at my door on Wednesday evening, her backpack slung low on her shoulder. She didn't text ahead, didn't call. Just knocked, quick and nervous, as though she wasn't sure I'd open. When I saw her standing there, cheeks flushed from the cold, I knew. She wanted more than company. Grandma, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder toward the street. Do you still have, the pie stuff? I almost laughed, but her urgency stopped me. I nodded and stepped aside. Inside, she dropped her bag by the table and sat down, fidgeting. Mom doesn't get it. She thinks food is just food. But yours, she shook her head. It felt different. Like the house was softer. Her words pierced me, gentle and raw. I reached for her hand. It's not about the food, Ruby. It's about what you put into it. She smiled faintly. So, will you make it again? Just for us? And so I did. We worked together, side by side. I taught her how to cut the butter into the flour, how the dough should feel when it was ready. Like cool clay, but softer. She laughed when the flour dusted her nose. I showed her how to dice carrots evenly, how to simmer the chicken low and slow until it surrendered into tenderness. Don't rush it, I told her. The pie knows if you rush. As the filling thickened on the stove, Ruby leaned close, breathing in the scent. This doesn't smell like anything from a box. Because it isn't, I said simply. When the pie went into the oven, we sat at the table, the kitchen warm with anticipation. Ruby traced her finger along the grain of the wood. Dad doesn't say it out loud, but I think he misses this. I saw his face when he ate it. He remembered I swallowed the ache in my throat. Your father grew up with this. It's in him, whether he admits it or not, the timer dinged. I pulled out the pie, the crust golden, the sauce bubbling at the edges. Ruby clapped softly, grinning. It's perfect. We cut into it while it was still steaming, each bite rich and familiar. She ate quickly at first, then slowed, savoring. I wish we could eat like this every night, she said. Someday you'll know how, I answered. And maybe you'll teach someone else. She packed 2 extra slices into a container, tucking it into her bag. For Dad, she whispered. Don't tell Mom. When she left, I stood at the window watching her walk down the street, shoulders straighter than when she'd arrived. The house grew quiet again, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like waiting, like the first note of a song not yet sung. For the first time in years, I believed the taste of home could still be carried forward, one plate at a time. Carl called me the next evening. It wasn't his usual quick check-in, the kind he did out of obligation. His voice was different, hesitant, almost careful. "Mom," he began, clearing his throat. "Ruby brought something home yesterday. A piece of your pie." I stayed silent, waiting. He exhaled slowly. I ate it. Just one bite at first, but, well, it didn't taste like I remembered. It tasted better. Like Dad was still here. The words caught in my chest. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Carl's voice dropped, softer now. "I don't know how you did it. Julia keeps saying it's just food, that I'm overthinking. But she didn't taste what I did. It wasn't just dinner. It was memory, warmth. I don't even know how to explain it," I whispered. "You don't have to. I know." There was a pause, then a low laugh, awkward, almost embarrassed. "Ruby wants me to ask if you'll teach her. She's been talking about it nonstop. I think she wants to learn everything, not just pie." A warmth spread through me, though part of me hesitated. "And what about Julia?" Carl's silence told me enough. Then, finally, he sighed. "She won't like it. But Ruby's old enough to decide who she learns from. And maybe it's time I stop, letting Julia set all the rules." That admission was more surprising than the call itself. The next Sunday, when I arrived, Ruby practically pulled me to the kitchen. Carl followed, holding a notebook as if he might take notes too. Julia stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her smile brittle. "So, what's the lesson today?" she asked, too bright, too sharp. "Dough," Ruby said quickly, pulling out flour and butter from the fridge. "Grandma's going to show us how." Julia rolled her eyes. "You know there are classes online, right? Videos? Recipes? We don't need—" Carl cut her off gently. "Sometimes you need more than a recipe." That silenced her for a beat. We worked together, Ruby and I side by side, Carl watching. I guided her hands as she pressed the butter into the flour, feeling the texture change. She laughed when the flour puffed into the air, covering her shirt. Carl smiled, really smiled, the way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Julia lingered at the door, tapping her nails against the frame, pretending not to watch. When the dough was wrapped and chilling in the fridge, Ruby looked at me with eyes so bright it almost hurt. "It's like magic," she said. "But real." I touched her cheek, my hands dusted with flour. "It's not magic, darling. It's love." Behind us, Julia let out a sharp breath. I turned my head, catching her gaze just as she looked away. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, I knew I wasn't fighting it alone. Dinner that night was meant to be simple. Salad, bread, and the chicken pot pie Ruby insisted on finishing herself. I guided her quietly, letting her roll the dough, stir the filling, season with careful pinches. She was clumsy at first, but her determination steadied her hands. When the pie came out of the oven, the smell filled the house. Carl inhaled deeply, his eyes softening with something close to longing. Ruby bounced on her heels, proud and glowing. But Julia? Julia's lips pressed into a thin line. She set the table quickly, plates down harder than necessary. "Well," she said, "let's hope it's edible." Ruby bristled. "It's more than edible." "Just wait." We carried the dish to the table, steam rising like a banner. Carl served everyone. Ruby leaned forward eagerly, watching their reactions. Carl took the first bite. He closed his eyes, chewing slowly. Then he smiled, an open, boyish smile that startled me. "Perfect," he said. "Absolutely perfect." Ruby beamed. Julia cut into her slice, her fork scraping the plate. She lifted a bite, hesitated, then tasted. Her jaw worked, her face unreadable. Finally, she placed the fork down and folded her arms. "It's fine," she said flatly. "But honestly, this much fuss over pie? It's just food. We shouldn't be turning it into a religion." Carl looked at her sharply. "Julia." "No, really," she interrupted, her voice rising. "You two act like she's reinvented the wheel. It's a crust and some chicken. Big deal." The table stilled. Ruby's eyes filled with anger, her hands tightening around her fork. "It's not just food," she said. "It's home. You wouldn't understand." "Excuse me?" Julia snapped, her cheeks flushing. "I keep this home together while your father works and you sit in your room glued to your phone. Don't talk to me about what makes a home." Ruby pushed back her chair. "Maybe if you actually cooked once in a while, you'd get it." "Enough!" Carl's voice cracked through the room like a whip. The silence that followed was sharp, brittle. Julia's face burned red. Ruby looked down, blinking fast. Carl glanced at me, then at the half-eaten pie. His voice was quieter now, but firm. This matters. More than you think. Maybe we forgot it for a while. But not anymore." Julia stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. "So what? Now she runs the kitchen?" "She runs this house?" Carl shook his head. "No, but we're not going to dismiss her anymore." Her lips parted, then closed. She stood abruptly, grabbed her plate, and disappeared into the kitchen. The slam of the faucet echoed moments later. Ruby looked at me, her face pale but fierce. "Grandma," she whispered. "Can we make it again next week?" I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Yes, darling." "We will." For the first time, the fight wasn't just mine, it was ours. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Julia didn't call, didn't send her usual clipped texts about Sunday plans. When Ruby phoned me one evening, her voice was low. "Mom's different," she whispered. "She barely talks to Dad. She keeps saying you're trying to take over, that you're making her look bad." My heart ached, but I forced calm into my voice. "I'm not here to take anything, Ruby. I only wanted to remind you what food can mean, what family can mean," Ruby sniffed. "I know. Dad knows too. She's just angry." On Sunday, I decided not to bring anything. No pie dish, no recipes. I walked into their house with only my handbag, determined to keep the peace. Julia greeted me at the door, her smile stiff. The smell of roasting chicken filled the air. Pots clattered in the kitchen. She had cooked. "Well," she said, her voice too bright, "I thought I'd show we don't need old-fashioned pies every week. I've made a proper dinner." From scratch, Carl looked surprised, but he kissed her cheek and murmured something polite. Ruby gave me a sideways glance, uneasy. We sat down to eat. Julia served plates herself, carefully portioning the chicken, spooning vegetables with precision. "See?" she said. "Perfectly fine. No need for drama." I lifted my fork. The chicken was dry, the vegetables limp, but I smiled anyway, not out of cruelty but compassion. Cooking from scratch wasn't easy, not if you hadn't done it in years. Carl chewed slowly, his brow furrowed. Ruby tried to swallow, but coughed softly. Julia's eyes darted between us, searching for praise. "It's good," Carl said finally, though his tone was hesitant. Ruby stayed silent. Julia's smile faltered. "Better than pie, I'd say." "Healthier too," Ruby blurted. "It's not better." Julia froze. Ruby's face flushed, but her voice steadied. "It's not just about taste. Grandma's food. It feels different. Like someone cared enough to get it right." Carl set down his fork, nodding slowly. "She's right. It's not just food. It's what it means." Julia's chair scraped back as she stood abruptly. "So that's it then. Everything she does is perfect. Everything I do is wrong?" Her voice trembled with fury. "No one said that," Carl began, but she cut him off. I work, I pay bills, I keep this house running, and suddenly I'm the villain because I don't spend hours making pies? Her words cracked, sharp as glass. She stormed into the kitchen, the sound of cupboards slamming echoing through the walls. Silence returned to the table. Ruby pushed her plate away, whispering, "I didn't mean to start a fight." I reached across, touching her hand. "You didn't. You only spoke the truth." Carl looked at me then, his eyes heavy. "She won't forgive this easily." I nodded, my heart steady. "Then let her fight. I won't stop cooking, and I won't stop reminding you who you are." It was Carl who called me late that Wednesday. His voice carried a heaviness I recognized too well. "Mom," he began, hesitating. "Julia thinks, she thinks you're doing this on purpose. That you're trying to—" He stopped, searching for words. "Manipulate Ruby. Manipulate me." The accusation stung, though I'd expected it. I took a breath, steadying myself. "And what do you think?" Carl was silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed. "I don't know. I just know things feel different since that first pie. Julia says you're making her look like a bad wife, a bad mother. She says you're trying to turn Ruby against her." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tight to my ear. "Carl, I only made dinner, nothing more. Ruby came to me because she wanted to learn. That's all." He groaned softly. "I believe you. I do. But Julia won't let it go. She says you're digging yourself back into the center of everything." I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "I never wanted the center. I only wanted a place at the table." The line went quiet, his breathing the only sound. "I wish she could see that," he whispered. When Sunday came, Julia was colder than before. She served takeout again, the containers spread on the counter like a declaration. "No pies this week," she said firmly. Ruby glanced at me, her face pinched with frustration. Carl sat stiffly, shoulders tense. We ate in silence until Julia suddenly spoke, her voice sharp. "You know, Ruby, you should be careful. Your grandmother means well, but she doesn't understand how hard life is today. She had her time." "Things are different now," Ruby bristled. "She understands more than you think." Julia leaned forward, eyes flashing. "She's filling your head with nonsense. Food isn't love, it's fuel. If you don't learn that, you'll be disappointed." I set down my fork, my voice calm but steady. "Food is love, Julia. It always has been, not the only kind, but a kind that matters. You can dismiss me, but don't dismiss what Ruby feels." Julia's face hardened. "There it is. You see? Always undermining me. Always trying to prove you know better." Carl's hand slammed against the table, startling us all. "Enough." His voice shook, not with anger but exhaustion. "This isn't about better. It's about remembering who we are. And He stopped, his eyes lowering. "I think I forgot, until Mom reminded me." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Julia's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling as if words fought to escape but failed. She rose abruptly, muttering something about needing air, and left the room. Ruby turned to me, her eyes wide. "She hates you." I reached for her hand, my voice gentle. "Maybe she does. But hate often hides fear." Carl looked at me then, torn, but with something resolute beneath the weariness. "Don't stop, Mom. Don't let her push you out again." And in that moment, I knew the real battle had only just begun. Julia waited until the following Sunday to make her move. I could feel it the moment I walked through the door, something charged in the air, like a storm gathering. The dining room was set more formally than usual, cloth napkins, polished glasses, candles flickering even though it was barely 6 in the evening. Carl greeted me with a weary smile, but Julia's face was taut, stretched into a brittle kind of politeness. Ruby hovered nearby, watching, restless. Tonight, Julia announced. "We're doing something different. Since everyone seems to think your grandmother is the queen of the kitchen, I thought we'd have her show us. A little demonstration." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, daring me. She gestured toward the counter, where ingredients sat in disarray. Flour, eggs, butter, but no clear recipe. "Julia," Carl started, but she cut him off. "No, really," she said sweetly. "You all think her food is magic. Let's see it happen." Right now, Ruby's mouth dropped open. "That's not fair. You can't just—" "Ruby," Julia snapped. "Let the grown-ups handle this." The room froze. I felt my pulse thrum in my temples. This was meant to humiliate me, to prove that whatever I made was ordinary, messy, unimpressive. But instead of shrinking back, I nodded slowly. "All right," I said. My voice was calm, though my hands tightened around the strap of my bag. "But I'll choose what I make." "Not you." Julia blinked, caught off guard. "Fine. Whatever you want." I scanned the scattered ingredients. It wasn't much, but I could work with it. Memories stirred. Sunday afternoons when my own mother let me knead dough on the old wooden table, her hands guiding mine. I turned to Ruby. "Help me," I said. Her face lit up, and she hurried to the counter. Together, we worked in silence at first, measuring, stirring, shaping. Carl watched quietly, his eyes softening as if some part of him had been carried back to childhood. Julia hovered in the doorway, her arms crossed, her impatience sharp as knives. The oven warmed the room, and soon the scent of baking bread filled the house. Not elaborate, not fancy, just bread, simple, golden, alive. When it was done, I sliced it while it was still warm, the crust crackling under the knife. I passed the first piece to Ruby. She tore it in half, the steam rising, and handed one to Carl. They both bit in, and silence followed, silence thick with recognition. Carl closed his eyes. Ruby smiled, her face shining. Julia finally sat down, arms still crossed. She tasted a piece, and though she tried to mask it, her expression faltered. The bread was undeniable. I looked at her gently, not with triumph, but with truth. It was never about showing off. It was about remembering where love begins. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. The room belonged to the bread, to the memory it carried, to the fact that she could not erase what was baked into us. Julia didn't mention the bread afterward, not once. But I could feel the weight of her silence. It wasn't surrender, it was plotting. By Wednesday, Ruby called me in tears. "Grandma, she says I can't come over anymore. She says you're confusing me." My stomach twisted. "Confusing you how?" Ruby sniffled. "She says you're making me think cooking is more important than school, that you're trying to make me love you more than her." I closed my eyes, pressing a hand to my chest. Julia wasn't striking at me this time. She was striking at Ruby. "Darling," I said softly, "listen to me. Loving me doesn't mean you stop loving her, and learning to cook won't take anything away from your future. It will only add to it. Do you understand?" Ruby hesitated. "I understand." But she doesn't. She slammed my door when I said I wanted to help you again. I bit my lip, holding back the surge of anger. "Then we'll be patient. Sometimes love is a long road." "You walk it anyway." Sunday came heavy with tension. Julia avoided my eyes, speaking only in clipped phrases. Ruby hovered near me, subdued, her usual chatter dimmed. Carl tried to bridge the silence, but his efforts fell flat. At dinner, Julia set a casserole on the table. "Ruby made this," she announced, though Ruby's puzzled glance betrayed otherwise. I took a small bite. It wasn't Ruby's work, too seasoned, too harsh. Julia had made it but stolen the credit. Carl frowned. "Really?" "Ruby, I didn't know you'd been cooking with your mom." Ruby's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it, caught between truth and loyalty. Julia's smile was tight, triumphant. "She helped. Didn't you, Ruby?" Ruby's eyes flicked to me. I gave her the smallest nod. Speak your truth. I willed silently. She swallowed hard. I didn't make it. Grandma, you always say food tastes like the hands that made it. And these aren't my hands. Julia froze, her face draining of color. Carl's gaze sharpened. Julia? Her lips pressed together. Fine, she snapped. I made it. But does it matter who cooked it? We're wasting energy worshipping food. Ruby pushed her plate away, her voice trembling but strong. It matters because lying matters. You can't make me stop loving Grandma. You can't make me stop learning from her. Julia's chair screeched as she stood. Enough! This house is falling apart because of her, she spat, pointing at me. She's poisoning you against me. Carl's face hardened in a way I hadn't seen in years. No, Julia. She's reminding us who we were before we forgot. The room pulsed with silence. Julia's fury burned, but she turned and stormed out, leaving her own casserole untouched. Ruby looked at me then, her eyes wide and wet. Grandma, she whispered. Promise you won't stop teaching me. I squeezed her hand. I promise. As long as you keep wanting to learn, it was Carl who told me first. He called late on Friday, his voice tired, almost frayed. Mom, he said, Julia gave me an ultimatum tonight. She says it's her or you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hand tightened around the receiver. And what did you say? Carl sighed heavily. I told her there's no choice to be made. You're my mother. She's my wife. But she insists. She says you're driving a wedge through the middle of our marriage. His voice cracked, and I heard the boy he once was, torn, desperate for peace. I don't want to lose either of you, he whispered. I steadied my voice, though my chest trembled. Carl, I never asked you to choose, but if she's asking that of you, then the wedge isn't me. It's her fear. He was quiet. Then, softly, she doesn't understand you. She never has. I wanted to comfort him, but words felt like fragile glass. Don't answer her anger with anger. Just remember what's true. When Sunday came, Julia's eyes were icy. She didn't greet me, didn't set a plate for me at the table. Carl wordlessly fetched one from the cupboard, his hand shaking slightly as he placed it beside Ruby's. The meal was tense. Julia barely ate, her fork scraping against her plate. Ruby glanced between us, anxious. Finally, Julia slammed her fork down. Carl, this can't go on. She undermines me. She fills Ruby's head with nonsense, and you just sit there. It's destroying us. Carl's jaw tightened. Julia, no, she cut in, her voice sharp. You pick. Today, is it your mother or me? The room went still. Ruby gasped. My own heart thudded like a drum. Carl leaned back slowly, his hands clasped together. His eyes moved from Julia to me, then back to Julia. You want me to choose? He said quietly. Yes, Julia snapped, her face flushed with certainty. Choose your wife. Or choose her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. I choose the truth. Julia's face twisted. What does that even mean? It means, Carl said, his tone firm now, I won't pretend anymore. My mother has shown us love, real love, in ways we've ignored. You want me to cut her out, but what you're asking is for me to deny who I am, who we are. And I won't. Julia's lips parted, then closed again. Her fury had no place to land. She pushed back her chair so violently it toppled over. Without another word, she stormed upstairs, her footsteps heavy. The silence that followed was thick. Ruby whispered, Dad. Carl rubbed his eyes. I don't know what happens next, he said. But I know this. Mom isn't leaving this table again. I reached across, laying my hand over his. For the first time in years, the three of us sat together, not united by peace yet, but by honesty. The fallout came quicker than I expected. On Tuesday, Marlene from across the street knocked on my door, holding a casserole I hadn't asked for. Heard you've been interfering, she said gently, though her eyes darted with curiosity. Julia stopped by yesterday. She said things are difficult, that you've been overstepping. I forced a smile, thanked her for the food, and closed the door with shaking hands. Interfering, overstepping. Julia's words, not mine. By Thursday, 2 cousins called, distant relatives who rarely reached out. Both repeated the same line. Julia says you're making things hard on the family. It was clear she was spinning her story, painting herself as the victim. At Sunday dinner, the tension was visible even before I sat down. A couple of Julia's friends were there, neighbors I barely knew. She had invited them as witnesses, I realized. Julia smiled tightly. We were just talking about how important it is to respect boundaries in families. How sometimes older generations forget it's time to let go. Her words slid into the air like poison, sweetened with false civility. Her friends nodded, murmuring agreement. Carl stiffened, his fork unmoving. Ruby's face flushed with anger. I set my napkin down slowly. Boundaries are important, I said evenly, but respect flows both ways. I never asked to be the center, only to share what I know, what I love. If that's threatening, perhaps the problem isn't boundaries, but fear. One of Julia's friends shifted uncomfortably. The other sipped water, avoiding my eyes. Julia's smile faltered. Fear? What should I be afraid of? An old recipe? A loaf of bread? No, I replied softly. You're afraid of being seen. Because when we see each other clearly, there are no excuses left. Ruby spoke then, her voice trembling but firm. Mom, you can invite the whole neighborhood, but it won't change the truth. Grandma's not the problem. Pretending she is? That's the problem. The table went still. Julia's friends looked at her, waiting for her to respond. Her face tightened, the color rising in her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but Carl spoke first. This ends here, he said, his voice steady. No more stories. No more neighbors dragged into this. If you're angry, face us. Don't run around spreading poison. Julia's eyes darted between him, Ruby, and me. For the first time, she looked cornered. You're all against me, she hissed. I'm the only one who sees it. Carl shook his head slowly. No, you're the only one who refuses to. The silence that followed was thick and final. Julia pushed her plate away, untouched, and left the table without a word. Ruby leaned closer, whispering, Grandma, she can't win, can she? I took her hand. Not if we stand together. And for the first time, I saw Julia's armor crack, not with rage, but with fear of losing the ground beneath her feet. The invitation never came. For the first time in months, Sunday passed without a word from Carl or Ruby. I waited by the phone until the light faded, telling myself not to care, telling myself I had my own supper waiting. But the silence gnawed. On Monday, Ruby appeared at my door, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Grandma, she blurted, Mom says you can't come anymore. To dinners. To anything. Her words stung, though I'd braced for them. And your father? I asked quietly. Ruby's eyes dropped. He doesn't know what to say. She told him if you step foot in the house again, she's leaving. For a long moment, I said nothing. The kettle whistled faintly from the kitchen. Finally, I reached for Ruby's hand. What do you think? Ruby's voice shook, but her grip was fierce. I think she's wrong. I think you belong that night. I barely slept. Julia's words echoed, cold and final. You can't come anymore. They wanted me erased, made into a shadow outside their door. But erasure was something I had survived before. I would not bow to it now. By Wednesday, Carl called. His voice was heavy, defeated. Mom, Julia's serious. She says if I let you keep coming, she'll file for separation. She says you've poisoned Ruby against her. I took a deep breath. And what do you believe? Silence stretched. Then he whispered, I don't know anymore. But I don't want to lose Ruby. I don't want to lose either of you. Carl, I said softly, you can't build a life on threats. You can only build it on truth. Remember that Sunday arrived again, and this time I didn't wait for an invitation. I baked my secret dish, my mother's apple dumplings, sweet with cinnamon, wrapped in dough rolled thin by patient hands. It was the food of my childhood, the one recipe I never shared lightly. When evening came, I carried the warm dish to Carl's doorstep. Julia opened the door, her eyes widening with shock, then narrowing with fury. I told you, she hissed. You're not welcome. I stepped past her, steady, holding the dish before me like an offering and a weapon both. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to sit at the table where I belong. Carl appeared behind her, frozen in the hallway. Ruby rushed forward, her eyes lighting at the smell. You made them, she whispered. Julia's voice shook with rage. Carl, make her leave. But Carl didn't move. He looked at me, then at Ruby, then at Julia. Slowly he said, No. She stays. The air cracked with the weight of it. Julia's face paled, her lips trembling. For the first time, the choice had been spoken aloud, not as an ultimatum, but as truth. I placed the dumplings on the table. The scent filled the house, cutting through the silence like a hymn. And Julia, with all her fury, had no words left. The dumplings cooled on the table, their syrup pooling golden at the edges of the dish. No one moved at first. Julia stood rigid, her hands clenched, while Carl and Ruby sat frozen, waiting. Finally, Ruby reached forward. She spooned one onto her plate, steam rising as she cut it open. It smells like your house, Grandma, she whispered. Then she took a bite. Her face lit up, soft and radiant. It tastes like home. Carl followed, his fork trembling slightly as he tried his first mouthful. He closed his eyes, swallowed, and shook his head slowly. I haven't tasted this since I was a boy. His voice cracked. I'd forgotten how much it meant. Julia's arms tightened across her chest. You're all sentimental fools, she spat. It's flour and apples. Nothing more. No, Carl said sharply, his eyes flashing. It's everything more. It's what we've been missing, what we've let slip away. The silence that followed was heavy. Julia's face flushed deep red. So that's it? You choose her recipes over your wife? Over your family? Ruby's fork clattered against her plate. She is family, she burst out. Her eyes were fierce now, glistening with tears. And if you can't see that, Mom, then maybe you're the one choosing wrong. Julia's lips parted, stunned. The room seemed to tilt. For once, she had no quick retort, no shield of sarcasm. Carl leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Julia, no one is asking you to be less, but you've spent months trying to make my mother disappear. I won't let it happen. Not again. Her gaze darted between him, me, and Ruby, her certainty unraveling. You're all against me, she whispered, her voice trembling. No, I said softly. We're not against you. We're just done pretending that love is shameful, done treating tradition as weakness. You can sit with us, Julia, but you can't erase me. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Julia sank into her chair slowly, her hands limp now. She didn't eat, but she didn't storm off either. For the first time, she sat in silence while the rest of us shared a meal. Ruby spooned seconds onto her plate, grinning through her tears. Grandma, she said, you have to teach me this one too. Every step. I want to remember it forever. Carl nodded, his eyes still damp. Me too. I don't want to forget again. I smiled faintly, my chest warm despite the chill in the room. Then we'll make them together. And every time we do, you'll taste not just food, but the hands that made it, the love behind it. The dumplings were gone within minutes, The dish scraped clean. Julia sat stiff, but she had no power left to silence what filled the room. For once, the table belonged not to her bitterness, but to us. To truth. To bread. To dumplings. To love made visible.